My name's Joe Harris. I'm Professor of French and Early Modern Comparative Literature at Royal Holloway, University of London. So I'm going to be talking about an aspect of Tartuffe that people don't tend to look at very much, which is the aspect of social class, or perhaps rather social rank. And I'm going to be looking at it in relation in particular to two characters, the servant Doreen and to Tartuffe himself. Now there are a couple of other servant characters. There is Madame Pernel's servant Flippote and Tartuffe's servant Laurent, but they only turn up for sort of one act, one scene each, and they don't even say anything, so I'm not going to put them to one side. Now, 17th century France was a very socially stratified, hierarchical society. The distinctions between the different social ranks were seen effectively as God-given. They were part of the natural harmony of the universe, and it wasn't possible to move from one class to another. You might earn money, you might lose money, but you cannot shake off those essential qualities that are inherent or seen as inherent to the station, the social station you were born into. Now, I think this is interesting because literature often plays with these expectations and these ideas. For example, another of Molière's plays is called Le Bourgeois Gentilhomme. It's about a man who attempts to, he's a bourgeois, he's a member of the middle class, but he has aspirations to be a member of the aristocracy. He tries to imitate their manners and completely fails in various ways. So the play is reassuring us that those distinctions between different social classes really can't be overcome in any way. There is another tradition, a more novel-based tradition of the picaresque novel, where you do have characters who start out from quite lowly or unknown origins and work their way up through society and sometimes find a place for themselves just relying on their own sort of native wits, their skills, their intelligence, their ability to trick people. They're sometimes sort of lovable rogue figures. And I think that Tartuffe is a character we might want to see slightly in that way. He is obviously the villain of the play, he's a fraud, but he is also possibly a self-made man who is able to create for himself, carve out for himself a place within a society that he does not fully belong to because of his own station. One of the first things that we learn about Tartuffe from Doreen, the servant, is that he is poor, he is a nobody, he is un inconnu, so he is unknown, and also he has no money, he has no shoes, he has nothing going for him to start with, and he works his way into Orgon's family. Orgon accepts him into his family and becomes so dependent on him that he wants to anchor him into the family to make sure he doesn't run off and maybe move to another family or whatever by marrying him to his own daughter Marianne. And so Orgon wants to give him a sense of legitimacy and an identity and a social status that he doesn't have to start with. And this is what Doreen in particular holds against him. Doreen, the servant, repeatedly, or well, twice at least, refers to Tartuffe as a gueux, that is a beggar. At one point, when trying to convince Orgon, her master, to break off the marriage and to reject the whole idea, she says, you know, with all of your wealth, with all of your money, why would you choose a beggar as a son-in-law? So I think it's very interesting that in this play, it's Doreen, it's the servant, who is most concerned to preserve that social hierarchy. She is, of course, the other main character who belongs to the lower orders. And she is the one whose objection to Tartuffe is primarily on that level, that he is an imposter, an outsider who has wormed his way up into a middle-class household. If we compare Doreen with other members of the household, what they object to with Tartuffe is his fraudulence, his impiety, the fact that he's placed these draconian restrictions on the household, preventing them from having any social interaction with other families. So they're more interested in the curtailments to their social life, whereas Doreen is fighting to preserve the established social order that would normally see Tartuffe just as a beggar. So it can be very helpful to compare Doreen and Tartuffe in different ways. Doreen is lower class, but she has a position within the family and within the social order. Tartuffe is an outsider who doesn't. Doreen is also one of the most appealing characters in the play. She's on stage quite a lot. She also talks almost directly to the audience through asides quite a lot of the time. So she's a mediator, she expresses things to the audience, and there's a certain complicity between the audience and her. She also articulates ideas far more forcefully and directly than other members of the household are. They're upper class or at least upper bourgeois characters. And so they're maybe too polite to say certain things that Doreen, as a low-born servant, can say a bit more explicitly. Tartuffe, on the other hand, is a very mysterious, shadowy figure. We don't see him on stage very much. We don't learn anything particularly about his backstory. We don't know how he has managed to end up with a servant of his own. The question of Laurent is a very strange one I've never quite worked out. But he's a shadowy, mysterious figure whose power partially comes dramatically from the fact that we don't see very much of him on stage. So Doreen and Tartuffe are sort of two poles in many ways. Doreen, in many ways, is like a stock servant figure that we find in comedies of the time. She is cheeky, disrespectful sometimes to her social superiors, and yet she's also a likeable, good-hearted character who has the family's interests at heart. Doreen is often a source of comedy in the play. Sometimes she punctures the richer characters' aspirations and ideas and values. For example, when Marianne, realizing she's going to be forced to marry Tartuffe, considers killing herself, Doreen makes fun of her for that idea, saying that it's totally, a ludicrously overblown idea. Sometimes, as I mentioned, she also articulates what the other characters on stage are too polite to do. So she's an interesting character. She is outspoken, and yet she does still respect the social hierarchy. And this comes across, I think, in two particular scenes. In her first interactions with her master, Orgon. So we've got the father of the household, and we've got the servant, Doreen, in two scenes, Act 1, Scene 5 and Act 2, Scene 2. Now in Act 1, Scene 5, this is the first time we see Orgon turn up on stage. Molière needs to make it clear to the audience that Orgon is a fool, and therefore that his love for Tartuffe is totally misplaced. And what he does is to set Orgon in a dialogue with Doreen. Doreen has come to announce that Orgon's wife is recovering from an illness that she's recently had, and Orgon repeatedly, mechanically repeats two phrases. He first of all always asks, "Et Tartuffe, what about Tartuffe?" And then when Doreen gives a description of how Tartuffe has been enjoying his lavish lifestyle and gorging himself on the family's food and so forth, he then replies, "Le pauvre homme, what a poor man." And he does this numerous times. The humour of this scene is largely that Orgon is mechanical in his behaviour. His responses are predictable, a rhythm builds up, and we know what's coming next. The one thing that develops over the course of this scene is that Doreen becomes a lot more aware of how her master is responding. She starts off being quite factual in her account of things, but as Orgon carries on repeating these same stock phrases, she starts to make fun of Tartuffe in various ways. First of all, suggesting that he had eaten 2 parched ears very devotement, in a very devout way. By the end, even suggesting that after Elmire had been bled for her health, Tartuffe had nobly decided to drink a bottle of wine in order to redress the balance and to make up for the blood that his mistress, or that Elmire, had lost. So she is becoming increasingly verbally creative, making fun of Orgon, although he doesn't realise it. And Orgon's brother-in-law Cléante, in the following scene, the first thing he says to her is that Doreen is making fun of you, and he doesn't realise it. So Doreen doesn't directly challenge Orgon, but she is running rings round him verbally, showing herself to be a lot more intelligent than her master is. Now we see the same premise taken in a different way in Act 2, Scene 2. Now here, things are a lot more urgent for Doreen. She has learned that Orgon is going to marry his daughter Marianne off to Tartuffe, and she is trying to stop this. And the way she does this is quite revealing. The first thing she does is to come on stage and announce, "I've heard this ridiculous rumour that you are going to marry your daughter to Tartuffe." So what she's doing right from the start is addressing the prospective marriage, but she's doing it as though it is something so ridiculous that it couldn't ever happen. So she's implicitly flattering her master, suggesting that Orgon is obviously far too sensible and reasonable ever to contemplate doing anything as ludicrous as this. So that sets Orgon on the back foot, because he now has to not only insist that he does indeed want his daughter to marry Tartuffe, but that it is reasonable for him to do that. So Orgon insists that he is telling the truth, that he does indeed want his daughter to marry Tartuffe. Doreen's response then is to treat that as a joke as well. She gives him, in a sense, another excuse, another way to back out of this marriage by suggesting to Marianne as well. She says to Marianne, don't worry, don't take this seriously. Obviously your father's just joking. He couldn't be serious enough to really mean this. So once again, she is running rings around her master, but doing it in supposedly a respectful way, reminding Orgon of his reputation and of his the duties of his position as the father of the household, because he is supposedly meant to be above these sorts of things. Doreen's strategy here is very clever. She's actually implicitly flattering Orgon, first of all suggesting that he is far too sensible ever to countenance such an idea of marrying his daughter off to Tartuffe, and then even when Orgon insists that he means it seriously, assuming that, well, that must be a joke then, he must be making a joke because it goes without saying that he could never do such a thing. Later on in that scene as well, Doreen again appeals to Orgon's reputation, saying, well, if you genuinely do mean this, I'm concerned about your honour, your status, your reputation, because I don't want you to expose yourself to people's mockery, to public humiliation for having made this silly decision. So what she is repeatedly doing then is actually implicitly flattering her master, reminding him at the same time, through flattery, of the responsibilities of his social status as the father of the household. So what we find then is that Molière here, through Doreen, is not necessarily, he's not challenging the status quo in any way. He's not saying that the whole social hierarchy is somehow wrong or invalid, but rather, through Doreen, reminding Orgon and the audience of the responsibilities that come with a particular social station, and making fun of characters who fall short of those expectations while keeping the actual status quo unchallenged. So I think the main thing that we can take away from this play is that Molière is working within certain social structures and not really challenging them. Tartuffe, the outsider, remains banished and in fact imprisoned by the end of the play, precisely for trying to, well, for going beyond what's expected of him within his social status. Doreen as well is playfully alluding to the problems of, well, the failings of her master Orgon, but at the same time she's not challenging the position of father, she's only making fun of Orgon's own capacity to fulfill that role. So in many ways what Molière is actually doing is flattering the implicit social system by reminding us of the responsibilities that come with being a true father of the household.